There was a cure, a course of pills that could have killed the thing inside her completely, and the one window to use it was open for exactly 3 weeks, while a 10-year-old girl lay in a Mexican hospital with one side of her face swollen shut and a fever no one could explain. Nobody used it because nobody knew it was there. The swelling faded, everyone moved on, and a clock started ticking inside her heart that no one would hear for 10 years.
She was 10 years old, on a camping trip in the hills of northern Mexico, and by every account, it was a good one. Then, a few days later, she got sick in a way nobody could explain. It started with a fever that didn't fit any ordinary bug, and then her face began to swell. Not a little. One side of her face, centered around her eye, puffed up so severely that it alarmed everyone who saw it. It got bad enough that she was admitted to a hospital where she stayed for 3 weeks while doctors tried to figure out what was happening to a previously healthy child. They never figured it out. After 3 weeks, the swelling went down on its own. The fever passed. The girl felt fine again, and she went home with no answer. No name for what had happened. Just a strange episode that everyone eventually filed away as one of those things a kid gets that clears up on its own. She grew up. She got on with her life. And a clock that no one in that hospital had heard start ticking kept right on ticking, quietly, for the next 10 years inside the muscle of her heart. Here's what makes this one different from almost every other story on this channel. There was a cure, a real one, a course of pills that can kill the thing that was making her sick completely. And the single best window to use that cure was open during those exact 3 weeks she spent in the hospital with a swollen face. Nobody used it because nobody knew it was there. By the time anyone finally understood what she had, that window had been closed for a decade, and it was never going to open again. To understand how that happened, you have to go back to that swollen face because it wasn't random. It was the single most important clue in the entire story, and it has a name. The thing that bit her was a triatomine, better known by a nickname that sounds almost sweet until you know what it does. The kissing bug. It earned that name because of a specific, unsettling habit. These insects come out at night and are drawn to the faces of sleeping people, to the thin skin around the mouth and the eyes. They bite there, on the face, which is exactly what happened to a girl asleep in a tent in northern Mexico. But the bite itself is not how the parasite gets into you, and this is the detail that trips people up, so it's worth getting exactly right. The kissing bug isn't like a mosquito injecting something through its needle. What it carries, a single-celled parasite called Trypanosoma cruzi, lives in the bug's gut and comes out in its feces. So the bug bites, feeds, and defecates on the skin right next to the wound. Then the sleeping person, feeling the itch, scratches and rubs those infected droppings into the fresh bite, or into their eye, or their lips. The parasite doesn't get injected. It gets rubbed in by the victim's own hand in their sleep. And when it enters through the tissue around the eye, it causes a very particular reaction. The eyelid and the area around it swell up into a firm, purplish puffiness on that one side of the face. Doctors have a name for it. Romanya's sign. And to anyone who knows what it means, it is a screaming, unmistakable announcement that a person has just been infected with Chagas disease in its early acute phase. The one and only phase where the cure works. That is the tragedy hiding in her swollen face. That swelling was never a symptom to wait out. It was the disease raising its hand at the exact moment treatment could have wiped it out forever. But Romanya's sign only screams if you speak its language, and almost nobody outside of a few tropical medicine specialists does. To a general doctor looking at a swollen eye on a child, it looks like 100 more common things. It looks like pink eye. It looks like an allergic reaction. It looks like a reaction to a spider bite or an ordinary insect sting. Every one of those is a reasonable guess, and every one of them is wrong, and none of them lead to the parasite. So for 3 weeks, a hospital full of competent people treated the most textbook sign of acute Chagas disease as a mystery swelling, watched it resolve on its own, and sent her home cured of nothing. The window was open the entire time. Then it quietly closed. Because here's what the acute phase does. It fades. That's its cruelest trick. After a few weeks, the body's immune system beats the parasite back out of the bloodstream, the fever breaks, the swelling goes down, and the person feels completely normal again. To everyone watching, it looks like recovery. It looks like whatever it was, it's over. It is not over. The immune system pushes the parasite out of the blood, but it cannot get rid of it, because Trypanosoma cruzi has already gone into hiding. It burrows into muscle tissue, and it has a particular appetite for one muscle above all others, the heart. It slips inside the cells of the heart muscle and settles in for the long haul. And then it begins a process so slow that it produces no symptoms at all for years. The parasite lives in the heart tissue, and the body, sensing something is wrong, keeps sending immune cells to attack it. That constant low-grade battle, year after year, does damage. Not from the parasite alone, but from the endless inflammation around it. Little by little, healthy, flexible, electrically active heart muscle gets replaced by stiff scar tissue. The heart's walls thin and weaken. Its wiring, the electrical system that keeps it beating in a steady rhythm, gets scarred and disrupted. None of this hurts. None of it shows up in daily life. A person in this phase feels perfectly healthy, has no idea anything is wrong, and could pass a routine checkup without a flag. Doctors call this the silent phase, and it can last 10, 20, 30 years. She spent her teens and her early 20s in it, growing up, going to school, building a life, with a parasite slowly and painlessly turning parts of her heart to scar. And this is the exact beat that standard medicine is built to miss, because there is nothing to find. Blood tests in this phase can look clean. The parasite has left the bloodstream and gone into the tissue, so unless someone runs a specific antibody test they have no reason to order, it stays invisible. The heart looks structurally fine on a basic exam right up until the day the damage crosses a threshold. It is a disease that does its worst work, precisely where routine medicine isn't looking, on a timeline too long for anyone to connect the dots. A swollen eye at 10, a stopped heart at 20. Nothing in a normal medical mind links those two events across a decade of a person feeling completely fine. Before we get to the day that silence ended, take 1 second and hit subscribe on the Pathogen channel, because a new case like this one goes up every single week. And I want to ask you something for the comments, because it's the whole point of the story. If a swollen eye a decade ago was the only warning anyone ever got, would any doctor you have ever seen have caught it? Tell me below. Now, back to her heart. Roughly a decade after that camping trip in the United States, where she now lived, the silence ended. And it ended the way this disease often announces its return, with terrifying suddenness. The scarring in her heart had finally reached a point where the organ could no longer keep a steady rhythm, or could no longer pump the way it needed to. She may have felt it building for a while, an unusual fatigue, a shortness of breath, a fluttering or a racing in her chest. Or it may have given almost no warning at all. Because one of the signatures of advanced Chagas heart disease is sudden cardiac arrest. The heart's damaged electrical system simply misfires, and the heart stops. She ended up in an emergency room in a serious condition, a young adult with a failing heart and a dangerous rhythm, with no obvious reason for any of it. And here is the final failure point in the whole chain, the one that closes the trap. When a young, otherwise healthy person in the United States shows up with a heart that's failing for no clear reason, doctors have a label for that. They call it idiopathic cardiomyopathy. Idiopathic is a medical word that means, honestly, we don't know why. It is a diagnosis of not knowing. And in the United States, the thought that a tropical parasite picked up from a bug bite in Mexico 20 years earlier might be the reason a young person's heart is failing is a thought that, for most doctors, simply never comes. Chagas is filed in their minds under diseases of somewhere else. So the parasite that has been methodically scarring her heart for a decade sits there, undiagnosed, hidden inside a diagnosis that is really just an admission of a mystery. In this woman's case, the truth came out almost by accident. It often does. One of the most common ways Americans with Chagas ever find out they have it is not through a doctor connecting the dots, but through donating blood, because blood banks screen for it. A person gives blood to help someone else, and weeks later gets a letter saying their donation tested positive for a parasite they have never heard of. That is how thousands of people in this country have learned they were infected. Not from a diagnosis, from a rejection slip. However she finally learned the name, by the time she did, it changed almost nothing about her fate. Because the drugs that cure Chagas, benznidazole and nifurtimox, work by killing the parasite in the body, and they are dramatically effective in the acute phase, that early window when she was 10 and swollen and in the hospital. But once the disease has gone chronic, and the damage is scarring rather than active parasites in the blood, killing the parasite no longer reverses the harm. You cannot unscar a heart. At that stage, treatment stops being a cure and becomes management. Pacemakers and defibrillators to control the rhythm, medications to help the failing heart, in the worst cases, a transplant. Doctors treating the damage, decade after decade, never able to undo the 10 years no one saw. And this is the part that should genuinely unsettle you, because it is not the story of one unlucky woman in a far-off place. Chagas disease is here. It is now considered endemic in the United States. The kissing bugs that carry it live across the southern half of the country, and the best estimates say that more than 300,000 people in the United States are living with Chagas right now. Most of them have no idea. In fact, by some estimates, fewer than 1% of the people infected in this country have actually been diagnosed. That means hundreds of thousands of people are somewhere on the same timeline she was on, in that silent phase, feeling perfectly fine, with a parasite quietly working on their heart. And because so few American doctors are trained to think of it, a share of the heart failure diagnosed in this country as idiopathic, as cause unknown, is very likely Chagas that was never named. In certain communities, when researchers have actually gone looking, they have found that a meaningful fraction of unexplained heart failure was Chagas all along, hiding in plain sight under a label that means we don't know. So let's be clear about what actually happened to her, because it isn't what the title implies. The bug didn't kill her. A single bite from a kissing bug, treated in time, is a curable event. What killed her, or came closest to it, was the 10 years of everyone looking away. The doctor who saw a swollen eye and thought allergy. The system that let the acute phase fade without a name. The decade of silence that nobody was watching. The second doctor who saw a failing heart and wrote down idiopathic. At every single checkpoint where someone could have caught it, the disease was wearing the face of something ordinary, and everyone believed the disguise. Her story started with a swollen face in a tent in northern Mexico, a 10-year-old with a puffy eye and a fever that a whole hospital couldn't explain. In that moment, the clock started. The cure was sitting right there, one phase away, close enough to touch. And the single loudest warning the disease would ever give, that swollen eye, was mistaken for nothing at all. Everything that came after, all 10 silent years of it, flowed from that one clue that no one in the room could read. If this one made you think differently about the word idiopathic, do me a quick favor and tap the like button, because it helps this reach the next person who needs to know this disease is here and not somewhere else. And subscribe to the Pathogen channel because every week I break down another true case of the body under siege. And if you want to see another parasite that slips into the body and then waits years for the moment to strike, watch what happened to a man who walked barefoot on a Kentucky farm as a boy. Then watch how doctors also couldn't name what was shutting a hiker's organs down until someone finally stopped guessing. Both are on screen right now.